read all the new books. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Graham Harman and objects. He has underway object-oriented ontology and dialogues on realism co-authored with Manuel Delana. Sounds great.
I've seen so many good panels and presentations. The big brother is keeping an eye on us. The subject's supposed to know. Those of you who are not in academic philosophy, our discipline philosophy is still very much dominated by this ongoing war between Anglo-American philosophy on one side and so-called continental philosophy on the other side. And it's fashionable now to say that this division doesn't exist anymore. It's been superseded. Right, then let's see Harvard or Oxford invite SLAVOJ ZIZEK to the philosophy department. It's not going to happen, right? They think he's a clown, just like they thought Jacques Derrida was a clown. Happening now to change possibility. And it's the same thing in philosophy. Sometimes you need a little shadow. Some things are not clear. One of the strengths of continental philosophy, despite its complete institutional marginalization in universities, especially in the Anglophone world, is the interdisciplinary impact. It's not surprising that I'm not being hired by a philosophy department in the States. The blunt assertion approach to philosophy. Let me now get into the philosophical meats of this presentation. Triple O, or object-oriented ontology. I'm a realist philosopher, and there aren't too many of us in continental philosophy. And realism, of course, has a different meaning in philosophy from what it means in mathematics or politics, different fields. In philosophy, the bare minimum of what it takes to be a realist is you have to believe there's a world outside the mind that exists independently of the mind. And this is not news to analytic philosophy. Analytic philosophy began as a realist reaction against British idealism. People like F.H. Bradley who were interpreting Hegel in ways that Bertrand Russell and Moore found crazy, and they were trying to get philosophy back to realism, talking about a real world outside the mind. The twist for me is that reality outside the mind is only part of the story, because it's not only the mind that has an outside. It's not just the mind that is in opposition to reality. It's all entities for me. I see reality as something that's excessive even beyond causal relations, not just beyond the human mind. In Freud, the unconscious is a real thing. It's there. It's a hidden thing that never fully expresses itself. It's deep. Right? It's beyond our grasp. He compares it openly to Kant's thing in itself in his essay, The Unconscious. He draws an analogy between himself and Kant. He has no problem doing that. The conscious is something immanent. Right? It's the gaps or ruptures within language itself. And so it's not a real unconscious, it's an immanent unconscious. Well, I had some experience with Kant, probably. Kant, of course, is the philosopher who says there are things in themselves. We can't know what these things in themselves are because we are finite human creatures. All we can do is meditate on the conditions of our finitude. We can't do any better than that. We can't know whether there's really time and space outside the mind. We can't know even if God sees things in time and space or angels. Because all we know is that our experience must occur in time and space. Cause and effect, one of the 12 categories of understanding. How do we know that things really happen according to cause and effect and not randomly? We can't know for the things in themselves. We can only know that within the bounds of human experience, things happen according to cause and effect. Things are either unity, characterized by unity, plurality, or totality. I don't even remember all the 12 categories, but you can look them up anytime you want. The critique of pure reason and prolegomena. And German idealism's radicalization of Kant is simple. It says, all right, you think there's a thing outside thoughts, but that itself is a thought. Therefore, you never get out of the circle. This is what Meillet calls the correlational circle. You can't make a statement about anything outside this, and therefore Hegel immanentizes the thing in itself, in a sense, right? The difference between the noumenal and the phenomenal is internal to the phenomenal. That's one way of putting it. You never get out of that circle. And this is what we see now with the return of Badiou and Zizek and Meillet. It's kind of neo-German idealism. It's more than that, but it's also a neo-German idealism. It's an attempt to get rid of Kant in that way, by pointing to that flaw in the argument. You can't say there's something outside thought without thinking it, and therefore you're within the circle. But there's another, and the other one is the one that I prefer, that Triple O is based on. Meillet and Zizek and Badiou to some extent, but especially Meillet and Zizek would say, we need to get rid of the finitude in Kant, right? The way to radicalize Kant is to realize that we are capable of the infinite. We are capable, as Meillet puts it, of absolute eternal truths. Through mathematical deduction. And I say that we cannot get rid of this. I'm going to maintain that against this neo-German idealist current. I don't think this argument about the thing outside thought still being a thought works. For me, the finitude is inescapable. Nothing is ever translatable into knowledge, but more than that, nothing is translatable into any relation at all. And that's, I'll explain what I mean by that here. There's another aspect of Kant. It's not just the finitude of our knowledge, it's also the fact that for Kant, the human world relation stands in the place of all other relations. Think of it this way, there are trillions of entities in the universe, they're all in relation with each other in various ways. Kant is focused exclusively on the relation between thought and worlds. Why? Because we can't talk about world-world relations without passing through the conditions of human subjectivity. So if I talk about fire-burning cotton, an example I like because it goes to Islamic philosophy, which I talk quite every so often in Cairo, Kant would tell us that we can't really talk about the fire-cotton relation because all we can talk about is the way the human categories in space and time mediate that relation. And so really we're always talking about the human world relation. Any other relation. Talk about a relation between two objects, you're actually talking about your own relations. So the human world relation is at the center of everything. And this is what we call correlationism. And Meillet's way of getting rid of that is by the traditional German idealist route with some slight twists. My way of doing that is to say Kant should never have limited it to the human world relation in the first place. The noumena are not, the inaccessibility of the noumena is not some tragic cross born only by human beings, as though everything else touches the world directly and we poor humans are separated from it by this gap because we're subjects. No, all relations do this. I'm not saying the fire is necessarily conscious. People accuse me of panpsychism. That's not the point. I'm somewhat neutral on that question. But the point is that the fire and the cotton also have limited interactions, just as I have limited interactions with the cotton when I look at it. Some Heideggerians like to think that Heidegger is about the difference between theoretical and practical, right? Before we can actually look at the cotton and understand it, according to Heidegger, we have to use the cotton in shirts or pick it in the fields. That's the primary practical relation. The problem is that practical relations to things aren't really any closer than the theoretical relations. When I use cotton, I don't understand it any better than when I look at it or make a theory about cotton, or a botanist makes a theory about cotton. The object itself is deeper than any relation, and not just human relations, but inanimate relations as well. Fire-burning cotton is a translation or a caricature just like my looking at cotton. And this is the point that people start to think I'm crazy because this goes against the entire post-Kantian tradition of philosophy, which I would say is less characterized by finitude, since Hegel got rid of that, than by the centrality of the human world's relation. Take a supposedly radical philosopher like Merleau-Ponty. Merleau-Ponty was always visible and invisible. Okay? It's a good book. But Merleau-Ponty was always being presented when I was in graduate school as this radically futuristic thinker that nobody has figured out yet, and once we do, it's going to be a revolution. Blanchot was like that too. Merleau-Ponty, no one's got him yet. The problem is when you read the visible and the invisible, you find out that it's just the same old correlation structure. He says, the world looks at me just as I look at it. Okay, but where's the parts of the world looking at each other? Notice the human is always there on the scene. It's 50% of reality. This is my problem with modern philosophy. Human beings, which are one entity among trillions, we're a very interesting one for ourselves, yes. One entity among trillions becomes 50% of ontology. How did that happen? Thought here, meaning human thought, and a world there. World including plastic bags, dolphins, forests, stars, black holes, all of that gets called worlds. And then we here, subject, thoughts, becomes 50% of everything. And ZIZEK would be glaring at me right now because I'm attacking this idea. I think that is the problem with modern philosophy, and I'm going to get back to that at the end of my talk. Anyway, as I've said, German idealism was the radicalization of Kant by getting rid of finitude. I think this is one of the great counterfactual crossroads in the history of philosophy. Instead of German idealism, you could have had a German realism, which performed exactly the move that I'm talking about now. Instead of trying to get rid of finitude, you would try to spread that finitude to all entities so that all causal relations, even between inanimate things, would be marked by finitude. And this is quite thinkable because remember how dominant Leibniz's influence still was in Germany through Wolff. It sounds kind of like Leibnizian, doesn't it? All these monads perceiving each other indirectly through God. So it's quite conceivable this could have happened. This would have changed world history because, well, you wouldn't have had Marx. You would have had some other weird evil twin of Marx or something like a Star Trek parallel universe. What would have happened if we hadn't gone through Hegel? If we had gone instead through something that kept the finitude and made it thing, we would have had a very different 19th century intellectually. So in a sense, Triple O is a late attempt at this German realism, although it's not happening in Germany because they've been so imprinted by the German idealists' way of getting down Kant. They're never going to listen to us there, probably. At least most people won't. All right. Now, what about Triple O? Some of you don't know about it, maybe, or much about it, so I can't assume you do. Triple O stands for object-oriented ontology. I was using the term object-oriented philosophy since the 1990s, and then once I started getting friends who worked on this too, we needed a new term that wasn't so imprinted with my own views. And so BRYANT came up with object-oriented ontology, which we pronounce Triple O. And one of the ways to see what we're doing is to contrast this with Bruno Latour, who's one of my favorite living thinkers. I've written a couple books on him already and about to write a third. Bruno Latour tries to create what he calls a flat ontology, one that treats everything equally. And to do that, he has to ignore the difference between subjects and objects, and between nature and culture. And if you want to read about this, read We Have Never Been Modern. It's a masterpiece. English version 1993, Harvard University Press, and paperback. You can read in 1 or 2 sittings. Brilliant book, could change your life. The problem I have with Latour, of course, is one of the most interdisciplinary thinkers possible. We use him for everything, every possible discipline. The way he makes everything equal, however, is one I disagree with. The way he does it is by saying everything is defined by its effects. And so therefore, an army has an effect, the sun has effects, Popeye has effects, square circles have effects, and therefore all real and fictional things are on the same plane because everything has an effect. Everything is real insofar as it affects something else. The problem with this is that Latour becomes too much of a relational philosophy where things are defined exclusively by their effects. A thing is only what it does. As Latour puts it in Pandora's Hope, a thing is only whatever it transforms, modifies, perturbs, or creates. It is what it does. And there are sources for this idea. Whitehead says something like this. Semiotics, and also American pragmatism to some extent. It says, look at what a thing does. Don't follow false controversies about how many angels dance on the head of a pin unless it makes a practical difference. You know all that. So it has some background to it. Now there's a problem with it, which is that the background goes all the way back to some of Aristotle's enemies. If you read Aristotle's Metaphysics, there was a group called the Megarians, because they were from Megara west of Athens. The Megarians apparently thought that a thing is only what it's doing right now. So you're only a house builder if you're building a house at this very instant. If you're not building a house at this very instant, if you're resting or you're sleeping or you're doing something else, you're not a house builder. The house builder is the one who's doing it now. Everything is only what it actually is. And now Aristotle, of course, saw a problem with this. The problem is, what about a master house builder who happens to be sleeping? If they decide to wake up and start building, how do they go from the non-house builder to the house builder? Just by magic, they lose it all when they stop and they gain it all again, all their talents again once they start. Very implausible. And this is what led Aristotle to this famous conception of potentiality. There's got to be potential stored somewhere that's not actualized. I don't actually like potentiality for various reasons, but I like his arguments. That a thing cannot be just what it's currently doing. If I were nothing more than the act of giving this lecture, how can I be in Toronto a week from now, another place 2 weeks from now, something is in reserve in every entity that is not fully expressed.